Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Briyah Institute Leadership Lesson Series. My name is Adriana Machado. I'm the founder of Briyah, a benefit corporation based in the US that bridges innovation, practice, and purpose to inspire leaders to change organizations and create an impact economy. And what do I mean by that? An economy that pursues financial returns alongside positive impact for people and planet. Yes, it is possible, and Briyah is just one example of this kind of business as a force for good. So this is our sixth session of the Briyah series focused on leadership, great leaders, their journeys, their regeneration stories, their impact. It is time for all of us to embrace our unique leadership journeys wherever we are. And since the best way to teach is by example, let's get inspired by real cases, such as the one we'll focus on today with Jane Cull. So welcome, Jane. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much, Adriana. It's awesome to be with you.
Great. So I will read a little bit of a bio for Jane, but then I'll ask Jane to speak about herself in her own words. So Jane is an author, a speaker, a consultant on change. She's an expert on the biology of cognition, the work of Chilean biologist and systems thinker, whom I adore, Professor Humberto Maturana. And she has given many talks, workshops, seminars on the topic to a vast array of academic and non-academic audiences in both Australia and the United States. So today she is in New Zealand and I'm here in Miami, so across the globe. Among the books that she has written, I would like to point out The Circularity of Life. That's how I got to meet Jane. So an essential shift for sustainability. She's also a former associate editor of the Journal for Applied Systems Studies, a biannual academic journal dedicated to applied systems theory. She's part of the Great Transition Initiative and an international network of scholars and activists that analyze alternative scenarios and chart a path to a hopeful future. She's a former member of the advisory board of the Barcelona Consensus, a project that was dedicated to transitioning to a sustainable society. And she has initiated and led a global campaign to transition to a sustainable economy, a circular economy. Her current work focuses on how we think as being both the problem and solution for change. So Jane, as I said, who is Jane in your own words? Please enlighten us.
Thank you so much for that intro, Adriana. So who is Jane? Jane's very focused and passionate about social and environmental change, and also because this work has to do with ourselves. So what do we need? What is it that we need to change? What is it that we need to become aware of? So as I've figured out, and this has been a long journey, then I realized it has to do with how we think. So anyway, I won't go too much. We'll get into that in a little bit. But the power of Maturana's work is so profound because it's an awareness of what we do in language, and also the role of emotions in language. And this is, for me, as it is for you, very, very powerful work. And so it's very important to be aware and conscious of what we're doing in language, and in particular our emotions, because they're the foundation for how we think and our actions.
That's very powerful indeed. But before we talk about this subject more deeply, I would like to know a little bit of the trajectory. So before you got there, so growing up, what did you do? What happened that took you to where you are right now? What was your trajectory in life, Jane? Can you share a little bit with our audience, please?
Sure. Well, I've always been very, very interested and passionate about environmental change because nature and the environment doesn't have a voice. So I've always been passionate about that. And I've been so this was like back in my teens and not very long ago. So I explored certain pathways, and then I came across, so I ended up through a whole range of synchronicities, ended up at this self-development workshop and met a guy who introduced me to Maturana's work. Well, within 20 minutes of watching a seminar that Maturana did in Australia, in Melbourne, I knew that this is the path that I was supposed to go on, and I dropped absolutely everything and put my entire focus and life on his work. So it took a long time to understand because the languaging is very, as I would say it now, is very systemic. So when you're not used to that, then it's very difficult to understand. So then I began to apply it experientially, and then I began to see, oh my God, this is exactly what he's talking about, is exactly what we do. And then he goes into sort of like the awareness of the relation. So what does the relation mean? It means the domain of interactions. It means how we interact with the environment, how we interact with each other. And it's also about the big picture. It's also that we're part of something that's much larger than ourselves, which is what I call the web of life. So then I began, so this is a very long journey, obviously. So I started to pay attention to my experiences, and I began to apply his ontological diagram of the observer, which is the awareness of what we do in language and how we live in language. And we live according to our emotions, we can live in two different paths. So where we become aware that we live in language, then we become aware that we live a multiverse of realities, because we construct our experiences, our worlds, our worldviews in language. Whereas when we live the other path, which is called the path of objectivity, means that we live our experiences as true realities, and we go searching for the truth or the ultimate reality or whatever, but there's only one reality. Whereas the other path, we're aware that we're constructing or constituting our experiences in language. And so therefore we live a multiverse of realities. So there's no such thing as an objective truth, if you like.
Sorry to interrupt, but something you said that is very important for leaders that I'd like to point out is this awareness, this realization that we live in language. Yeah. Right. And as you said, it took a while for you to figure this out. It's not something you get instantaneously. Exactly. And leaders need to be more mindful of that experience that they have to go through themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it all just starts with awareness. I mean, that's where everything starts from, right? So awareness is also very interesting, because awareness happens when you reflect on what you're doing or you're reflecting on your experience. So the operation of reflection is essential for awareness. Without reflection, you are not conscious and aware of what you're doing or what you're constructing. So, and this is also something that's very, very interesting, is that we normally don't see what we're doing. So we're very unconscious. So to be able to do the operation of reflection, to make the distinctions of, what am I doing right now? What am I creating right now? What am I not seeing that I'm doing right now? So the operation of reflection is very, very important for awareness, because without that, you're not aware.
Yeah, and so back to your trajectory there, back to your journey. So sorry to interrupt the thinking.
Sorry, I just wanted to raise a really important point just in relation to this, is because language is a doing. So we do language, we do languaging, actually. So, but we don't see what we're doing. We don't see the doing of what we're doing.
While we're doing.
Huh?
We don't see it while we're doing.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
That's why reflection comes in.
Exactly. So then we become aware of, it's the doing that's the most important thing to see.
Okay. And how
don't see it.
and how does this switch happen to you?
Well, I had to do a lot of reflecting. So, and then I started to really, and it's interesting when you become aware and you start to pay attention to certain things, then you start to get insights, then you start to see more than you did, that you start to see more than you did before. So, and then you have like an expansion of awareness, right? Mm-hmm. And then you become aware of so many things and you have all these insights, and it's actually quite an incredible experience. Yeah.
This is another leadership lesson that I think is important to highlight here. This feeling of expansion. When you reach a point of reflection that you feel you expand your vision, your horizon, something happens that you see more than you used to before. That's kind of a very important, check mark in your journey, right?
Yeah.
So how do you explain that in a leadership journey, or in a leader's journey, or in your journey?
Well, first off, it starts with the operation of reflection. So then it's, I have to go, that's really interesting. How did I do that? Or what's showing up right now? Or how did I create this experience? And then from there, I can kind of like backtrack on what I did. I was thinking X, Y, Z. This is interesting. So when I think like this, then I create certain emotions, which is also not seen. And then I'm like, wow, well, that's really, really interesting. So how does that change my perception of myself? What's in my current view? How does it change my perception of the environment, or when I'm relating with other people, or how I'm perceiving something? So I'm just going to leave that there for a second, come back to the journey. So when I started to realize this, and I also read a book written by Fritjof Capra called The Systems View of Life. And a lot of his work is founded in Maturana, as you know. And so he talked about that our crisis, both socially and environmentally, has to do with a crisis of perception. Now, this hit me like a ton of bricks. And at this point, I was going to give up on my work because I was really struggling. But when I realized, oh my God, he's absolutely accurate with that, then I started to dig deeper experientially to figure out, what am I doing? Because it all comes down to me and how I'm viewing. But I'm looking at it through the lens of the biology of cognition, right? So then I began to play with emotions. Then I realized, so when I move into trust and I move into a relational way of thinking, so it's broad, it's expansive, it's exactly what you were saying before, then my perception starts to shift. And then we go expansive and we go big picture, but we can also see detail as well. And we have this incredible expansive view of, it's very interesting. So what it does is it creates an experience or a perception of our place in the world, of our sense of belonging, our sense of interconnectedness and interdependency. How I don't exist in separation, but I coexist in interconnectedness and interdependency with the big picture, the web of life, if you like. So what does that generate? So I come back to autonomy. I come back to my true self. I'm not in emotions anymore. I'm very calm. I'm very rational. And I can see in very broad, expansive ways. That's also reflective. If you pay attention to the experience, you'll start to see that when you go into that broad systemic view, then you're performing your distinctions in reflective thinking. It's not fear-based thinking, it's trust-based thinking, because that's your state of being.
So this notion of trust-based thinking, did it come to you before you wrote any book or as you were writing? Because you wrote 3 different books, so I suppose it's a process also, right?
Exactly.
How did you decide to write the first book? What happened then?
So the first one, which is Living Systems, an Introductory Guide to the Theories of Maturana and Varela. And so back in those times, because his work, I'm going to get really, because I'm very passionate about this work. So the work is very difficult to understand. If you're a layperson or even academic people were really struggling with the languaging. And I spent years and years understanding the language. What does that mean? What does that mean in daily life? So I thought to myself, this work is so powerful when you get it experientially. I thought to myself, it has to be written in such a way that people understand without losing the integrity of the distinctions of the language, because it's systems language. So that's how that book was written. And as part of that book, I started to explore more the consequences of being in the two ontological paths, which is the path of objectivity or the path of objectivity in parenthesis. And the emotioning is central for which path we go down or which path we construct in language.
So the first book is about the work of, the notion of systems thinking. It's the beginning of understanding that you have to shift from fragmented reality to more holistic views, to zooming out. So
no, this is more to make Maturana and Varela's work more, so the theories of living systems, to make it more accessible for people to understand, because it's so powerful when you start to get it, right?
Right.
So then after that, I'm not quite sure. I don't know. I remember a moment where I just had this feeling to write this book, and I had this awareness of, wow, I'm like everything is interconnected, everything is interdependent. Now, normally this is distinguished as being spiritual, but the fact of the matter is that, and this is what Maturana's work, how do I say, triggered an awareness of, is how we're systemically interconnected and interdependent. And that is actually the reality of life, not separation. So I decided, I was so triggered and passionate about writing this book. But then as a huge part of it, which is also very interesting, is that normally the traditional indigenous cultures already live in a systemic worldview. They live in the awareness of cycles and interconnectedness and interdependency. And I thought to myself, well, what? Because we're all human beings, right? So how come is it that in Western life we don't live that? How is it that they live in harmony with their environment and we don't? In Western life, it's all about destruction and depletion of the environment and disrespect, whereas the indigenous people had a whole different view of themselves and the world and the environment in which they lived, right? So I went and explored that, and so that's also a part of what's in the circularity of life.
So that's this more focused on the nature, sustainability, this aspect of integrating that part of Western life that we don't integrate so well. Correct.
But it also, a huge part of the book is also dedicated to the awareness of cycles, the awareness of how we are systemically interconnected and interdependent. And also a large section of the book is dedicated to how to make the shift. So how do you make the shift into trust such that you have the experience of this sense of belonging, all of what we just talked about previously. And when you start to see from that perspective, then you realize, you realize many things, but, we need to be taking care of and sustaining the very thing that sustains us and the whole economy globally. So if we don't sustain that, then how are you going to have economic growth and development? You can't do it.
And that is a good point that Maturana also highlighted in his work, is to sustain life. And this notion that you just mentioned, the awareness of cycles, is important for leaders, because for something new to emerge, something has to end. And if you are more aware of that and you live by those rules, let's say, you don't suffer so much, because you understand that for something new to emerge, something else has to end.
That's right. Or let go of.
Or let go of. Yeah, no attachment, which is another lesson from your book, right?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And
this was the second book?
This was the second book, yeah. So what's also very interesting is that you'll notice, so when we go into autonomy and our natural state of being, and we start to do systemic reflective thinking, then what you will see, what you will notice is that you will be able to perform several things, which is that you will be enabled to have insights in relation to what you see now that you didn't see before. You will be able to be creative from those insights, right? And is there attachment to anything when we are in our natural state of being, which is trust, the biology of trust, and when we start to do conscious, reflective, systemic thinking? Is there attachment to anything going on there? No, there isn't.
And in the situation we're in right now, because the world is going through a transition with so many huge challenges at the same time. Yeah. So being able to look and see these insights and have no attachment whatsoever, but be able to include things that are not so visible to the not trained eyes, right? So this is a very important skill for leaders these days, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. But I think what's primary, because as we know, the narrative around the whole situation is fear-based. So when we're in fear-based thinking, we become blind, we become unconscious, we become reactive, we lose our autonomy, and we lose the ability to be able to think consciously, responsibly, and systemically.
And creatively.
All of that when we start to do fear-based thinking, what I call attachment thinking.
So let's stop there. Narratives are important, and how you come to the narrative, how you shape the narrative also is important. So fear-based will lead to something that is not authentic or autonomous. It's more reactive. And trust-based, which is probably the opposite of fear-based, is trust-based, right?
Yeah.
So trust-based would be more the space for creativity happens when you're in that space, when you're in that mode, right?
Exactly. You can't be creative. If you pay attention to your experience, what you'll start to notice is, so as soon as you start to react and buy into or accept, because this is also not trivial. So again, it's paying attention to what we do, right, in language, in thinking. So if we react, then we are immediately going to be creating fear-based emotions and thought patterns. And we will have lost trust, we will have a lost autonomy, and then we will start to become, so we'll be creating emotions of fear, mistrust, panic probably, and then we will go into doubt and confusion. And we've completely lost ourselves now, right?
So
and we've lost our autonomy.
So fear-based leads to loss and confusion, not clarity.
Correct. And can we be creative in fear-based thinking and emotions? No, we can't.
Okay, but
unless you reflect, unless you become aware and you reflect and go, oh, that's interesting. I'm experiencing fear. Okay, what am I doing? Or what did I just do? And then you start to dig into what you're doing in your thinking.
Yeah, but how can people avoid thinking or living in fear, if they are losing their jobs, if they're getting COVID, or if they're concerned with the environment, what has to be present in leaders' minds when they face situations like that are easy for you to go to fear-based mode?
That's such an incredible question. That's such an incredible question. My suggestion would be is that first off, you have to reflect. You have to be present to your emotions. You have to be present to what's showing up. In other words, so there's going to be, I just gave some indicators of when we do attachment thinking. So what will happen is that some of the indicators will be anxiety, stress, fear, anger, frustration. Will it be in doubt and confusion? We won't trust ourselves, by the way. Extremely difficult to be creative. In fact, we want to avoid creativity, right? And some of this stuff can also be, it's a comfort zone, which is insane. I mean, how can fear be a comfort zone? Does that make sense? No. But this is what happens when we do that kind of thinking, right? So therefore, we create this reality that appears to be separate and independent from us, but we're creating it through how we're thinking.
Interesting. So we need to catch ourselves in the emotions, not subside them, not stop the emotioning. The emotion is important to so that we understand where we are coming from or what we're actually,
Exactly. So it's a fantastic, so from that perspective, it's a fantastic indicator of what we're doing in thinking.
All right.
So the only way that we have to perform the operation of reflection. So I'm in these particular emotions. What am I doing? What am I attached to? What have I just bought into? What have I just, you have to become aware. If you don't become aware, you're in it.
And I love the way you're
want to run and escape and get out of the emotion. And there's a whole range of things that we do to run and escape, and which are also very destructive. So this kind of thinking, this is really important what I'm going to say, right? So when we do this kind of thinking, we actually create a delusional world, because when you come back to yourself, it's no longer there. Now, this is very profound, very, very profound. So it's a world it's very destructive.
The illusion. So when you escape, when you don't when you don't face your emotions, you just try to pretend that's not there.
Yeah, exactly. Or we'll go into suppression and control.
Okay.
Which is what we normally do in that kind of thinking.
And is this what your third book is about?
Yeah. So awareness of what we're doing in thinking and what we create as a result in language, and how we create different emotions, or how different emotions are generated through how we think, is not trivial, not just in the context of leadership, but also daily life.
Right. Yeah, because when we talk about leaders, sometimes people think, leaders is just the big famous ones that we hear of in the storybooks and the history books. But there's self-leadership that we have to be mindful of, because we all can lead to some extent at some moment in life, whether it's in our family, community, or work, or society. But self-leadership is our task day to day, right? We make decisions every day.
I know. But isn't it interesting how we don't see that it's self-leadership? We see leadership in a whole different context, right? Like, these people have got their act together. These people know more. I mean, the whole aspect of awareness and self-development as a way to reflect on what we're doing and the experiences that we're creating, and how like if we look at leadership, for example, like even how a business culture is constituted, it's all made up in language. but we think it's real, but it's not real. We all made it up and we all agreed to it. We were all sort of complicit.
And maybe we repeat more than we allow ourselves to create something new, a new narrative, a more fitting narrative to what we want.
Exactly. And just if we take this into the context of sustainability, then this means that we can create a different narrative, because the Western culture narrative, as we've begun to see through this whole situation, is very fear-based, and it's also about control. So if we create a different narrative for the kind of world that we want to create in the context of sustainability, then we have to be thinking from we need to be thinking from autonomy, and we need to be doing conscious, responsible thinking. What kind of world do we want to create and that we're responsible for? All of us are responsible, right?
Yes, and this notion that the world is not separate from us. We are
exactly
in it. We are living, we're in it, we're building it, we're creating the structures around it.
Yes.
That's Maturana's work. I love that he reminds us of that.
Exactly.
And I think that it's just, like you said, a comfort zone to delegate it. Oh no, it's not my problem. Somebody else will lead the society towards something, or it's somebody else's problem to deal with.
Exactly. And it's interesting when we do fear-based thinking. I mean, I see this for myself sometimes, is I don't want, because it's a comfort zone, I don't want to take responsibility for what I'm doing. In fact, I can't even see this is the consequences of doing fear-based thinking. I don't see, literally. I actually have to do the operation of reflection in order to see.
That's so important, because I think people, with the justification that life is very rushed and they're too busy, people don't take time to reflect or meditate or stop and think or whatever you want to call it. But in your work and in the 3 books you wrote, I feel that there is that message that is so important for anybody, but especially for leaders. Take time to pause and think and reflect. So this is, at least the way I got it, is a message you've been telling leaders, and you've been applying it to yourself in your journey all the way.
Exactly. And I'm still learning. From what I'm doing.
Well, that's another leadership lesson.
Stop, right?
Yes, that's another leadership lesson. It never stops. And the more you learn, the more you know you don't know.
Exactly. But what I do know is, and this is just so powerful, is the realities that we construct and we think that are real. So when we come back, if I come back to attachment thinking, so when we do fear-based thinking, we actually create a past and a future at the same time. So the past we're trying to escape from, and we're rushing into a future. So this is literally what we create. Whereas when we come back to trust and we do reflective thinking, do we create that? No, we don't. It's not there.
How's that?
Because because we're in the biology of trust, we move back into trust. So what does the emotioning of trust do? So the emotioning of trust expands our view. So it's what becomes possible in the biology of trust. When we're in fear, for example, then we cannot see clearly. Our thinking is tunnel vision. It's linear. We don't have an expansive view. We have a very narrow, limited view. And we don't see the consequences of our thinking, either on the environment, the planet, other people, ourselves, our work, whatever it is, we don't see. So why? Because fear inhibits and restricts, because we're holding on, right? So everything is like tense. And so therefore that inhibits or restricts
our senses, our sensoriality, our ability to see.
Well, yeah, and the biology.
Yeah.
Because the biology is tense, right?
And this is critical for innovation. So if leaders are agree that innovation is important, and they, in their companies, governments, any organization they sit in, and they need to be thinking of alternative ways or innovative ways, or even engaging in innovation as a process, because as Maturana says, it's a relational dynamic. It doesn't,
Exactly.
innovation is not a product, it's a process.
Yep.
So for leaders to be able to innovate, they need to move away from the fear that restricts biology to allow this new to emerge.
Exactly.
So any process for innovation, I believe, would have to do this exercise of being aware of where your thinking is coming from.
Exactly.
If it's coming from fear, it might not be as creative as if it's coming from trust.
Yeah.
Is that what you say in your books?
So with the biology of fear, I mean, you may be able to do, but it's if you're going to do any creativity in attachment thinking, then it's going to be very reactive, and you're not going to be thinking through the impacts and consequences of that solution or that innovation, or either for human health, the environment, yourself, whatever. So
you have chances of having
reactive.
Unintended consequences that we speak about in innovation all the time. So there are unintended consequences, but if you don't look for those interconnections, the chances for having negative unintended consequences to other, parts of the story there are higher.
Exactly. And the thing is, when we do conscious responsible thinking, and then we start to distinguish, okay, so what are the consequences going to be? They're going to be X, Y, Z. They're going to be blah, 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 blah. Do I want those? So with the awareness of what the consequences are going to be, do I want those consequences or not? So then you're being responsible for the choices and the decisions that somebody is making around the consequences and the impacts of the innovation. I mean, this is so not trivial what we're talking about. Like, just thinking about technology, where some of the present technology is going, which is, anyway, that's I won't get into that conversation, but it's just being driven through without any reflecting on the consequences.
So the leaders involved in the process of developing technologies would need to have this reflective process in their innovative processes.
Exactly.
So they are mindful of the connections and the consequences that their innovation might lead to.
Exactly. And then so from there, then they can go, well, I don't want those consequences. Okay, well, we need to come up with another solution.
We challenge ourselves further.
Yes, exactly. But the whole thing is that, again, it comes down to self-leadership, right? Mm-hmm. And being responsible.
True. That reminds me, responsible leadership. That's also another trend that I have been hearing a lot. So not only you lead by example, so you are walking the talk, you're true to yourself. That's another lesson that people always refer to, especially at Briyah. You take risk, you listen, right? But you are more systemic. I mean, you're not just
tunnel vision.
With the tunnel vision to get the task just out of the way, right?
Yeah, exactly. But interestingly, like, another really, really, really important aspect, if you start to notice then how you change, so coming back to self-leadership, how you change as a person when you start to do conscious, responsible, systemic thinking. If you start to pay attention, oh, that's interesting. I'm not in fear-based emotions anymore. I'm back in trust. And then I'm able to, and I have freedom and I have autonomy. I'm able to see and do all these other things that I didn't think I was capable of doing before.
So
then you have to go, what's going on here? You know, like, really? I mean, this is incredible work, no?
Yeah.
So how we change as a person, and then that changes your whole perspective of yourself and your abilities and how you relate with others, your work, whatever it is, you know, how you think about the environment, how you want to make changes in the world. Well, you're going to be much more conscious and responsible about what those are going to be.
And I'm sure the changes you were facing along the way inspire you to the next move, right?
Well, I knew this was very profound because I was going through the shift myself.
Yeah.
So when I was writing The Circularity of Life, and I began to pay attention to, well, if I do this, then what happens? If I do that, then what happens? How do I change as a result, right? So a lot of that work is in The Circularity of Life, and then what was I going to say? And then in my current book, so there was a moment, so this was a long time ago, there was a moment where I was holding on in my thinking. I wasn't even seeing that I was in thinking, but I was. And I began to say, oh my God, I'm creating emotions. Look at what I'm doing in thinking. And then it blew my mind when I saw what I was doing. And then I thought to myself, well, how am I doing that? And I had to pay attention to what I was doing. And then I figured out, when I start to do that kind of thinking, these are all the experiences that I'm creating for myself, that I'm suffering from, by the way. I mean, it's not trivial. And then I had to come up with tools to make myself aware, and then snap out of that kind of thinking and move back into autonomy and reflective thinking, which moves me back into my true self, by the way.
That's good. So
then I began to see, oh my God, so this self that I'm living in fear, this self that I'm creating or constructing, right, in language, in thinking, is not even real. It's a delusion. So therefore the pain, the suffering, and all the rest of it that goes with it is also a delusion. It's not trivial, Adriana.
And with the awareness, you're able to get back to your true self.
Exactly.
Which is something leaders have to do constantly, because life is full of this moment of triggering you and changing and transforming.
Exactly.
And you need to be able to bring yourself back to your true self all the time.
Exactly. So I've developed, tools to create the awareness and to snap us out of that kind of thinking and bring us back to our true selves and to autonomy and reflective thinking, because that's the solution to attachment thinking. And I also want to say, this is also not trivial, is that attachment thinking, I also think, is cultural.
How's that?
I haven't figured that out yet. But what I'm paying attention to is narratives in the culture and how they're fear-based. And they're based on control.
Is this something you're working with leaders these days?
No, my next focus is going to be on conscious, responsible thinking as a workshop. And this will be for people in the space of circular, sustainability practitioners to help them, when they're consulting with organisations, and how to get more innovation going in the right direction. Yeah.
That's so needed too. So I usually ask our guests about a regenerative story. So is there a regenerative story for Jane in your trajectory already, Jane?
Well, I'm doing it and I'm on it, right? Yeah. So my regenerative story is to provide awareness of how we're thinking as being both the problem and the solution for change. And So that's my regenerative story. And yeah. And
that's very regenerative and positive. So you're not only thinking of, oh, I am the problem. No, I am the problem and the solution.
Yes, yes. And when we see, so this is also interesting, is that when we start to see that we're the ones that are creating the problem through how we're perceiving, through how we're thinking, then it's like, wow, look how powerful I am.
That's just reminding me of an example that Jen Jacob Stam, another systems thinker, gives in his book, that when we are complaining about traffic jams, oh, this won't move. This is happening to me, but you are in the traffic jam. So you are the traffic jam. Changes the whole perspective.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And do you remember, I've started to understand a bit where Maturana talks about we live in the happening of life, right? So I'm drawing attention to the happening, so which can refer to triggers or reacting, or it's like life is happening to you instead of, well, hang on a second, I'm actually creating life for myself.
Yeah, and you create that in which you focus your attention to, or yes. If you don't reflect upon it, you just go with the flow.
Yes.
So it's then easier for you to say, oh, no, this is happening to me, because you're not out in the driver's seat.
Exactly. Right? And yes, and thank you for saying in the driver's seat, because the other thing is that when you come back to trust and autonomy and conscious responsible thinking, you are back in charge. Like, that's what happens. That's the experience. You're like, right, let's go.
That's self-leadership. If we don't embrace that concept, it's easy for us to just blame someone else for something happening, right?
Yeah, completely.
So it's both a responsibility and also a necessity for you to step into that driver's seat and be the leader, if not for society, but for your own life.
Yeah, exactly. Or, in the context of, sustainability, or being, the leader, like a team leader, or like in the context of an organization is like, a team leader or a CEO or a manager or a business operator, or, there's so many different aspects to that, right?
Right. It doesn't matter the role, but it's the attitude.
Exactly. And the other interesting thing is that with the whole current situation, then people can look at because this is also so interesting. So when we react to a fear-based narrative, it will take us into victim mode, 100%. If people have lost their jobs due to certain reasons, then that can be an opportunity to find something else. So the person then becomes responsible, puts themselves back in charge. Right, okay, this is an opportunity. What options and possibilities are there for me? And go looking for those. But it's interesting when we react to a fear-based narrative, right? Like I've seen this for myself as well. I had to figure this out. But when I react to a fear-based narrative, it takes me utterly into victim mode. And life is happening to me instead of me being in the driver's seat.
That's an important concept for leaders as well. Remember, we can be in the driver's seat. We don't need to be victims of the circumstances.
It requires awareness. It requires reflection, yeah?
Right. And awareness, as you said.
Exactly.
That's beautiful, Jane. Unfortunately, this is getting to an end here. We're almost talking for an hour now. But before we go, I'd love to ask you to give our audience a closing message. What would you tell our audience about whatever you want?
It's really, really important to be conscious and aware of what we're doing in language and how we are creating our experiences, our emotions, even our reactions. And how, because normally we see we don't see that thinking is in language and thinking is something that we're doing. But if you pay attention to your experience, you can start to see, oh, thinking is something that I'm doing. Oh, thinking is something that I'm doing in language. Therefore, I'm creating or I'm constructing my experiences in thinking in language. So this is very important to see. And then how am I, so when we do attachment thinking, what kind of experiences am I creating in thinking? And then what if I do conscious responsible thinking, then how does that, what is my experience now? Does that world that I was living in 5 minutes ago exist anymore? No, it doesn't. That's really interesting. Why is that? Does that mean I was creating it? Yes, it does. Because I'm not experiencing that anymore.
And with that comes the power of creating something better in the future. So every day you wake up to a new day, you have a new opportunity to create something.
Exactly. But it's only, you can't, it's very difficult to do that from fear-based thinking. You'll have to, and this is also, sorry, I'm keep going on, but like, then we'd switch into positive thinking if we're in fear-based thinking, right? Oh, I've got to be positive, but that's a facade, right? When we come back to conscious responsible thinking, we come back to trust, then we're like, wow, it's a brand new day. What am I going to do today? What am I going to put my focus on? Do you have to, like that's just natural. It's normal. Whereas if you do positive thinking from fear-based thinking, it's a facade, it's a mask, and you're trying to talk yourself out of what you're experiencing. And it's never going to work, by the way.
That's a subtle difference, but it's an important one.
Very.
Be careful not to start your positive thinking from fear-based, because that's going to lead to more delusion.
Correct.
Make sure you are in the comfort of your confidence and trust to then create something positive around it.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly, so again, you just made another brilliant distinction. So when we come back to autonomy and we come back to trust and doing conscious responsible thinking, so notice the change in yourself. Are you confident? Well, you're strong. The confidence is that, well, no, the confidence is like, you're just strong. You're confident in your strength.
Have confidence in your strength. That's a beautiful message to close.
Yeah, yeah.
So our audience, please listen to Jane. Have some kind of strength. So be confident in your strength, because we all have it.
Exactly. So all the illusion that we create in attachment thinking, which is insecurity, doubt, fear, I'm not capable, I can't do it. There's a whole range of insecurity issues. Do we feel strong there? No. Do we have to talk ourselves into being confident? Yes. Does the confidence last? No, it doesn't. Why? Because we keep circling or cycling back into attachment thinking. So it doesn't work. Whereas when we...
No, but life is the impermanence of life too. So
Yes. So here we're thinking that this is real, everything's permanent and fixed and so on and so forth. And we all know that that's an illusion, right?
Right.
Because change is constant. Everything is in motion, in nature, in life, in the biology, our thoughts, our emotions, everything is in motion. But we don't see that when we're in attachment thinking.
So that means we don't have to just get in this state and hope to stay there forever, but we need to know how to constantly get back to that state.
Exactly. So beautifully put.
See?
Exactly.
Conversation, the two of us.
And look how creative it is, right? How generative it is.
Yeah, again, it's Maturana saying that we live in language and we are in this relational space. So the conversation is a learning experience for both me and you. Thank you so much, Jane, for offering me this opportunity.
So welcome.
offering our audience this opportunity. So thank you all for watching us. If you want to learn more about Jane, we will be posting more about her work. And stay tuned to Briyah for more systems thinking, for more leadership lessons. Get inspired with our conversations just like this one. So thank you so much, Jane, once again for being with me.
You're so welcome.